welcome to Identity at the Center Live. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad. How about yourself? Actually, I'm
Good. Getting
great.
ready. You're doing great, yeah, because you're kind of off, right?
I'm on vacation, right? I think everyone who understands, vacation in the biz means work is still probably getting done somewhere behind the screens. But yes, I am
You're
theoretically, let's
working
just say on
less,
vacation. Yeah, exactly.
working less for the next few weeks, and shopping more. I mean,
Yep.
that's my life right now. I'm wearing out the Amazon.com keys on my keyboard, and what I love about Amazon.com is the example you always use. You always talk to people about what is a good user experience, and you can draw this parallel to IAM. Amazon.com. Nobody teaches you how to use Amazon.com. You just kind of figure it out.
Spending money is inherently in our DNA, apparently.
But I mean, they do a good job of like putting everything there for you to kind of figure out. And I think they use a lot of things that you see everywhere else on the web. So I don't know what their magic formula is, but the kind of catchphrase of nobody teaches you how to use Amazon.com, that's spot on, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much everyone can figure it out.
Well, it's a great approach. I think even just from an identity standpoint, treating identity like a product, even with your own organization, make it easy for people to use the services that are out there, and take advantage of societal structures that already exist from a user interface standpoint, or even from a process
Absolutely.
standpoint. We should probably talk about what this is because we're still relatively new. This is our third live stream that we've been doing. We're doing this weekly. This is a complementary part of what we do on the Identity at the Center podcast. Something that's a little less scripted. Not that the podcast is scripted, but a little more loosey goosey. Less formal kind of trains of thought. We're not always sure what we're going to talk about, so it might be pretty off the cuff and kind of gut reactions, hot takes, if you will, that sort of thing. But yeah, that's kind of what we're here for.
Well, I'm looking forward to the day that a lot of people tune into the stream and hit us up with questions, and it'll be even more hot take and more off the cuff. I mean, we're doing a little bit of preparation now in terms of trying to find an article to talk about, right? So that will at least give us something to discuss until we have questions coming through. I would say to folks, the other thing is if they're watching this video after the fact and are thinking about a question that they'd like us to address, just post in the comments of the most recent video. That'll come as a notification to you, Jeff,
Mm-hmm.
and then we can bring it up on the next live stream.
Yep. Drop comments down below. If you're catching us on the live stream, we can certainly, bring things into the conversation that way as well. So it's definitely meant to be more engaging, a little more real time too, so we can talk more current events. I know Log4j or Log4Shell has been the big thing for the last several days. As I'm sure everyone is kind of scrambling. I think we'll probably be relatively Log4j clean today. At this point, I think it's pretty well documented why you should be updating your Java to at least something within the last 5 years. So at least the remote code wouldn't be executed. Not that it solves denial of service or anything like that, but you know, there's a plug for keeping your systems updated. How about that?
The thing I'm more concerned about is, it seems like a lot of the big ransomware or the big 0 day vulnerabilities that get announced go out when all of us IT folk are trying to take some vacation time. So, Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve, I wouldn't be surprised if like that big announcement comes out
Yeah.
right around that time that, these nefarious cyber criminals go to work trying to ruin our time off.
It's by design, right? I think you don't rob a store typically during daylight. Is you wait for everyone to go home, and when there's less people there, that can cause complications. So, unfortunately, that's true. I mean, I think it was around this time. I think last year, right? We were talking about SolarWinds even. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's unfortunate, but you know, thank you to all the IAM heroes and other IT heroes out there that are kind of keeping things running so that we can continue to spend money on all of our e-commerce platforms of choice. How about that?
There you go.
So one of the things we want to do too is kind of talk about what did we work on this week. I'll be honest, I didn't do bleep because I'm theoretically on vacation, other than responding to emails and kind of things like that. But what about yourself? Any interesting things from an identity perspective that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I used up my vacation throughout the year, so I have pretty little time off remaining. And kind of my insight for this week is, what we do in our jobs is we develop IAM strategies. So the IAM strategy needs to speak to many folks in the organization, needs to be able to speak to the business, and needs to be able to speak to IT. So at some level, it's got to have sufficient detail, but at the same time, it's got to be boiled up into a strong message that is clear and concise and can be delivered, in a elevator pitch almost. And so that's pretty much what my week is involved is we're kind of at the end of a couple of projects where we've got that very detailed strategy that has all the components. It speaks to these large business cases, the things that people know about, but at the same time, trying to be able to tailor a message or some slides so that you can have a roadshow. That's an important factor for IAM, program managers to be able to have a roadshow, to meet with HR, to meet with senior executives, to kind of say, here's what our strategy is, here's what our roadmap is. That's where that can get really hard to do is around architectures, right? So when you have these architecture diagrams that at a very detailed level show you all the data flows or work or use case flows, and then you have to bring it up from that 10,000 foot view to something in the middle that can be communicated to IT executives, and then at a very high level, something that can be communicated to just about anyone. So that's what I spent a lot of my time this week on, was taking that detailed message and then building views of it to communicate at different levels.
Yeah, it's so important to be able to articulate what your strategy is. If you can't do it, you're gonna have a bad time, man. I mean, I think have your elevator pitch ready. I think this is one of the things that I really like about the work that we do on the consulting side is how do we take complex topics and really make it digestible, right? I think there's executive speak, try to make it simple for people to understand. People aren't as identity nerds as we are, right? For example, doing it. So we've got to be able to really be able to communicate, boil it down to base concepts, not just to make it, dumb, stupid kind of talk, right? That sort of thing. Not that people receiving that, but you've got to be able to make it simple to be able to understand for everybody, right? This needs to be something that everyone understands and moves forward with. So I'm a big fan of that. And, that's one of the things that I like to do is, okay, so we kind of know what the systemic issues are. What's the right way to message this, right? How do we make sure that the message is received loud and clear, it's understood, and you get buy-in. So if you're an IAM program manager out there, or you're in the IAM anything in the identity side of the world, and you're trying to get something done, think about your messaging to your key stakeholders, and that messaging might change too between stakeholders. You might have a more technical conversation with the folks who are into that, and then you might have a less technical conversation for folks who aren't as technical, or maybe looking at a more strategic view. So something to think about.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's the hardest to do is when you're in the weeds, when you're like really in the details, pulling out and taking that top level view down. I think that's where it might make sense to recruit some other people, try to explain it to them and see if they've got a view, especially if they're the kind of people who have been successful in communicating those kind of issues to the board or to executives within your company. They may spot things like, for example, we looked at the one that the one that's on my mind right now, where you've been less involved with it, but you looked at it and came up with we're struggling to keep up right now was kind of one of the slides, right? And that was a grouping for some of the observations and recommendations, but it was the perfect grouping, right? It took the complex ideas and kind of boil them down. So I think that was really valuable. And I feel like, at some level I was so in the weeds, it was hard for me to kind of come up with some of those groupings.
Yeah, I think evoke emotion when you're talking about this stuff, because I think everyone can kind of relate to, oh, don't you hate it when this happens, right? It's not play on it, but highlight it, right? This is an issue, right? We know this process sucks. What are we going to do to fix it, right? Let's stop talking and let's start doing. So, have that message ready. We've got a couple minutes left, so maybe what we do is, there was an article that actually it came out today. let me switch us over to that so we can kind of talk about it. But it was around why not to trust zero trust. And this is from Security Boulevard, written by Supremba today. So I hope I didn't butcher her name, but I thought it was a nice article because I think this has been an area where we've seen a lot of uptake in the security business and identity around zero trust. It's kind of been, at least in my mind, the security strategy du jour for about the last year or so. And what I like about this article is, I kind of scroll down a little bit here, is it's nice because it shows what the tenets are. So the NIST has a framework for zero trust, and here's what to kind of think about. I like it because the first thing it leads off is basically data and computing services are considered resources. Okay, so everything is a resource, right? Everything is data, and kind of talking through that and some of the other things that are out there. But I know Jimmy had a chance to read it too before we click the live button here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I think the headline is fantastic, right? It's like
Clickbait,
it's so
yes.
it's clickbait. Yeah, it's the sky is not blue, and here's why. It's like, well, of course it's blue. I need to read this article. And I thought, look, the point of the article wasn't to blow up zero trust. As far as I'm concerned, zero trust is probably the number one paradigm in IS and in IAM specifically right now. I think it's a great paradigm. Some of the points that were brought up around how zero trust is untrustworthy were kind of thought provoking. So, the first thing was, well, you have a full visibility of assets and control of network actions. So, in other words, you know what you have. And yeah, that's a good point, right? If you don't have a good asset inventory, you're going to struggle to make zero trust to deploy it properly. The next one was dealing with legacy systems. I mean, this is something that just you find over and over again, and it's not just with zero trust, but whether you're doing identity administration or authentication, multi-factor authentication, all these things are a lot harder with legacy technology. So, they're all good points to bring up. It's a very interesting article. I don't think is in any way makes me think zero trust is not good, right? I think zero trust survives this article, but I think it's a good article for people to go out, read, and just challenge your thinking.
Yeah, and I'll drop the link into this article after we're done going live here for folks who are catching on the replay. But yeah, zero trust is still, I think, the right approach. But I think it's an approach. It's not a single shot, one tool kind of solves everything. There's a lot of different things go with it. Keeping things updated. We kind of led off with keeping your Java updated, right? Those sorts of things. And it's an important part of a component. You got to know what you're going to protect. So having that inventory of resources. I know you and I, the work we do, we kind of, what's the first thing we kind of ask is, okay, well, tell us what's out there. What do you have? And, some organizations have a good handle on it. Some don't, and somewhere in between is probably where most people lie. And it's a journey and a marathon, not necessarily a sprint sometimes. But it is definitely something I think, from an article perspective. I love the title. It's like, when not to trust, zero trust. I'm like, okay, you got my interest. Now I'm going to start reading. It's like, okay, so it's really not poo-pooing zero trust. It's like, okay, it's a good approach, but it's an approach. It's a guideline. It's a framework. It's not an end-all be-all. You've got to make sure you've got plenty of accountability as part of your strategy for the other components of it too. So I'm a fan of that for sure.
Yeah, the zero trust is not going to solve some of the inherent weaknesses like not knowing what you have or having mainframes that don't work well with pretty much any modern IAM technology or IS technology, period. So, yeah, it's not that it's a fault of zero trust. It's like, these are some of the things that you need to take on. Not having a CMDB, you need to have one, right? If you want, a lot of times when we go in and we help organizations develop their strategy, if they don't have that, that becomes recommendation number one. You need to know your environment. You need to have an asset inventory.
Can't protect what you don't know. And even if that is just a spreadsheet or a Word document or even a notepad file, right? At least have a list somewhere and make an effort to track it. So yeah, I kind of like that article. I thought it was pretty good. Like I said, I'll put the show notes, or I'll put the link into the show notes, and we can kind of pitch it there. So I know we want to keep these short, so kind of around 15, 16 minutes is where we're at. And probably a good spot for us to go ahead and leave it for this week, especially since I'm on vacation, theoretically, right? But I enjoy doing this type of stuff. And again, as we kind of do this slow kind of launch rollout, we're still working through sort of, issues and making sure that we have it kind of the way we want, kind of make it easier. And we're still trying to figure out the right time slot too to do this. I think, we shifted it to Wednesday from our first two, which were on Friday mornings, just because of scheduling and things like that for the holiday. So if there's a time that works great, hit us up on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. Leave a comment on a stream or the replay, whatever it might look like, and we're happy to engage with folks that are out there. So anything else you want to bring up, Jim, before we call it a wrap for this week?
No, I hope everybody has, I hope everybody has a great holiday, whatever holiday you celebrate. I also just want to let people in, Kentucky and everywhere else that was affected by the tornadoes this week to know that they're in our thoughts and prayers. I mean, really just the devastation that I saw on the TV was just, mind blowing. Could you imagine that happening in your own neighborhood? Like just seeing everything destroyed.
Yeah, we actually had so I live in the Chicago area, and there was a tornado in Plainfield when I was in, I don't remember if it was in high school or maybe it was just after high school, which is not too far away from where I was at. And demolished the entire school. Thankfully, I don't think there were too many issues from a health standpoint, but I can't think of anything worse than a midnight tornado because you can't see it. So definitely, hope people get through this, this situation and come out stronger towards the end. So. So I think with that, on that positive note, thanks, Jim. We'll
I'm always good for something like that.
Right. Cue the Debbie Downer music there. I think we'll go ahead and leave it for this week. If you like what you saw, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the show, hit the notify button so you know when we're going to go live next. If you don't like what you saw, send it to an enemy, right? And share it with them. This is something new that we're trying, and like I said, we'll try to keep it brief. And do this weekly as well going into 2022. So we'll see you again next week, theoretically. And with that, thanks for watching, and we'll talk with everyone in the next one.
Thanks, everyone.